Great. So to start out, we open up our Revit project. We kind of let this load. And so here is a case study of the Farnsworth house, which is a little bit of fun. Probably went overboard in terms of modeling and documenting this project. If I take like a couple of sections, like every piece of structure and every concrete fill and all of the windows are all, including the roof structure and even the concrete pan, have all been modeled in this. This is probably way too much detail for like a typical Revit model. Even the windows all have like custom profiles and stuff in them, so that you can kind of see in section here and floor plan, they all have their respective pieces and parts, all according to the detail, and they also have kind of real-time furniture, which I'm not showing here. And I think I'm going to use the furniture that I've got because it's pretty high quality. And so this is kind of the first step in going into Twinmotion, is to understand what information you want to show up in your rendering. For this example, I could probably turn off all of those steel beams that are embedded in the floor. They're not going to be seen from a rendering perspective, but because this is such a kind of small model anyway, I'm just going to leave it. But again, think about like your context and what you're going to be putting into Twinmotion from what you have from the Revit model. So things like plants, I would hide using my visibility and graphics overrides. So I would come in here, and if I did have planting, I would come down and turn planting off because I want to see the Twinmotion planting. I want to use the assets that I can use in the render engine versus the Revit. Hopefully this is a little bit of stuff that you're already familiar with. Like hopefully I'm just kind of going over things you've already heard, but do want to be kind of complete in how we're going about this. And so with that, I'm actually going to come in here and turn my furniture on. And the reason that I'm doing that is I was able to find some very high quality models. For example, the Bertoya chair over here, the Barcelona chair by Mies, the Barcelona daybed, and like the Mies lounge, and a couple of the other chairs. We can even see like the stitching in the back of these are all pretty. It's pretty well detailed, and we might be able to find some better quality assets a little bit later as we kind of work through this. But for now, I'm going to leave those in. It's always something I can delete out later. So with that, I'm going to turn off my section box because I want everything in this scene. And up here, I have and it's hidden behind my recorder. And now zooms in my way, under Datasmith, and this might say Twinmotion in your case, depending on which version you downloaded. Under this we have a whole bunch of different exports, so you can actually make a direct live connection, or you can export the file as its kind of own entity, which is what I'm going to be going through today. That live link is pretty useful, and it can be beneficial in a lot of ways, just to be able to model in Revit and then have a live link into Twinmotion and see what you're changing in that model is going to look like directly. But for this case, I've already done all of the modeling, so we don't really have to have that live link. So I'll come up here and I'll say export Datasmith file. And then I can go to, I guess I'll just save it in here in the Farnsworth. I'm going to make a new folder just to keep everything concise, and I'll call this Twinmotion. That's where I'll be saving it. And then it gives me this kind of default file name down here. That's fine with me. I'm not too worried about it. So I'm going to click Save. And now what it's doing is it's wrapping all of this geometry creating UV maps and trying to get everything as close as possible to the real world scale, and it's doing a lot of stuff in the background. But now that export is already done, and then I'm going to open up the Epic Games launcher. I'm going to come over to Twinmotion, and then I'm using 2022.2.2, which is the latest version, and I'll click on launch. And it's going to open up Twinmotion for me. And it'll take just a little bit of time to kind of think through that. Great. So here is the different, or the kind of updated new view of Twinmotion. And we have a couple, just kind of go over the user interface for a little bit. Almost everything you're going to need is over on this left-hand side in terms of creating things. And then there's this sneaky little button over here that'll let you look at your library, which will have things like materials, your vegetation, lights, HDRI environments, which are really nice. We'll get into that today too. And then Quixel Megascans. So everything from Quixel can be browsed directly from Twinmotion. And they've recently added Sketchfab as another library. So there's even more content than I originally thought that is some pretty great content. If you go to sketchfab.com, I believe is the URL for that, you can kind of browse through all of the stuff that they have on there, and it's good quality assets, which is awesome. Kind of the more content that you have at your disposal, the faster you can get to where you want to go. There's nothing worse than someone saying we need a golf cart, the dreaded golf cart, in your scene, and you have to go through and map and texture and tile and create an asset for your scene. That's a huge amount of time, and it kind of breaks a typical kind of design workflow. With that, there's also at the top here, I've got this really nice kind of big panel that lets me change a couple of different things and just cues me into how to navigate around the scene. So left click is to orbit and kind of look around. Middle click will let me pan, and I'm really far away from the ground, so it's hard to see me panning. But here I can kind of pan left or right. And then right click will let me look around. And so because I don't have anything in the scene, like orbiting and looking don't seem that different, but they are. And when you do left click for orbit, it will orbit around where you left clicked. So if I want to orbit around something on a different side, it'll kind of move that around, just for kind of the user behavior here. For moving, I can use WASD, and then Q and E will let me go up and down. Also, I can use the arrow keys if I don't like using WASD, which is kind of your personal preference there. And then your speed is going, if you just type in the number 1 and then you move, you'll see you move very slowly. So this will help you if you're looking at detailed shots. If I hit the number 2, I move a little bit faster, 3, and all the way up to 6, where I can be like, easy. I'm a fast guy. I'm Speed Man, new superhero. And then there's also a settings here that you can click on that'll give you a whole bunch of kind of presets that if you don't like this navigation, you can kind of go through and change the default navigation to match another piece of software if you prefer. I usually just leave it as the Twinmotion editor, which I think is okay. Then over here, there's a couple more little sneaky buttons. There's this flyout panel, which will let you view all of the elements within your scene. And right now, we only have one asset in the scene, which is our ground. But this can be really useful if you're trying to turn things on and off or hide different elements based on like a night scene or a day scene, or turn your lights on, or even handle different view options or model options can all be kind of choreographed through the scene asset panel. And I can hide both of those by clicking, again, these little arrows on the side, which are kind of sneaky. Then I've got this eyeball, and this eyeball is going to let me change a couple of things about how I'm viewing this. So if I wanted to go into like walk mode, I'll click on this and I can go into pedestrian mode, and now I'm locked into the ground. So Q and E now are almost disabled, and as I move around, we can see I'm kind of stuck on this ground. So even if I'm looking down, I can 6 is probably too fast for that. So this little eyeball is pretty useful. There's another one. You can immediately view this in VR by clicking VR. I don't have a VR headset, so I'm not trying to do that. And then we can toggle through our views. Also with any of these, if you hit F1 when you're hovering over that, it'll give you can see there's a, we can see there's like a little YouTube symbol. And if I hit F1, it'll open up my browser, or it should. Here it goes. And thank you. It will open up the Twinmotion YouTube channel, which will let you kind of go through a whole bunch of the kind of tutorial videos if you do get stuck. So you can see there's quite a bit of content that you can browse through, and if you look at kind of all the videos, there's a ton of helpful tips to go through, webinars, tips and tricks, tutorials, that so on and so forth. So the first thing we want to do is import our Farnsworth house, and then we're going to start editing and managing some of the stuff around the scene. And I'm actually going to go back into drone mode for this so that I can kind of fly a little bit. So over on the left-hand side here, where I was talking about most of your creation editing stuff will happen, there's this button that says Import. That's the tab we're going into. So if we kind of cycle through these, you can see the different tooltips come up. So I'm going to click on the Import button, and then I'm going to browse to where that file is. Oh, before I do that, I do want to show that there's a couple of different elements that we can grab. So if we wanted a point cloud or some landscape elements, or a direct link, so if I wanted to link this directly to the Revit file, which it's kind of already finding on its own because I have Revit open, I could do that right away, but I'm just going to grab the geometry for now, and I save that in here. I now have that exported datasmith file. So if I click on that, I'm going to say open, and then I want to look at some of these options, and I just want to go through these pretty quick. They are very useful, and depending on what you're hoping to get out of your rendering, you might want to change a couple of these settings. So in terms of collapse, I think this is the one that I use most often. You can collapse, you can keep hierarchy, which will have every object in the scene will have its own, it'll be kind of its own object, and you can apply a material to it separately. You can collapse it by material, and what this essentially will do is group everything in your Revit scene that has the same Revit material. So this can also be problematic because some people will model everything with like the default walls and the default floors at first. And so everything with that default material is then going to be the same group, and it won't let you kind of manipulate the materials the way that you would hopefully expect, maybe out of kind of a generic model at first. And then collapse all, it will bring the whole file in and group everything together so that you're globally changing every piece of geometry in that scene all at once. And so for this one, I think I'm going to start by saying collapse material. I'm hoping, again, it's been a few years since I opened that Revit file, but I'm hoping I did a good job of actually applying good Revit materials. If not, I can come back and re-import and say keep hierarchy. So I'm going to say collapse by material. I do want this max UV precision. I haven't really noticed any difference by checking this on or off. For process all is that in some cases maybe you just want to bring in the lights from your scene because those were modeled separately or in a different file, but I'm not worried about that, or I can just bring in meshes as well. But I want to say all my light settings, I want to, I guess I can say set all values to Twinmotion default, and that might be good because the original light settings in the Revit scene aren't anything special right now. I haven't really done anything, but for now I'm just going to click use original, and then if you enable substitution, this will pretty much bring up a little table where you can kind of mix and match different objects from your Revit scene that you want to bring in separately that aren't part of your file, but maybe you want to substitute an object in your file for something else. That's how you would do it here. I don't really use this very much. It's a CSV, so comma separated value file, and it's pretty straightforward, but I haven't found much need to use that at all, if ever. So with that, I've checked my settings. I'll say import, and now it's going to process that Revit file for us. And we can see my Farnsworth house model has been brought in. At first, it's not going to look very good. And the reason for that is that these are the default Revit materials that are being applied. They are not they're not Twinmotion materials. So kind of the first thing that I usually do is go through and swap out all of these materials for something a little bit nicer. But the other thing that I'm going to do is kind of adjust my ground plane so that this is a little bit nicer. We can see when I click on an object, I get this little widget here that is similar to the gumball and Rhino. But there's a couple of other behaviors we can get out of it. And if we come down here to this this little toolbar at the bottom of the main viewing window, if I hold on, I think I can. I hit this arrow to expand this out. So then I can say I either want to kind of move things around. I want to rotate them. I can scale them. I can move with collision. This is kind of a new feature they're just dealing with. So like if you wanted like a bunch of balls to be bouncing around, I guess, you can do something like that. There's also gravity that then you would kind of play with these things. And then these will let you kind of toggle where that pivot is if you want to move a piece or an object around a little bit differently than the way that that pretty much just lets you move where this widget shows up. I don't want to move any of this stuff. I think it's fine where it is. And we can see here kind of the accuracy of how our different objects came in, and they're looking okay. I want to create this scene, and this is something we talked about in the last class, but I want to create it in a way that I want to look at some feedback. So I found this image of the Farnsworth house that I think is gorgeous. I want to try to recreate this image. So here's my inspiration to be working from. So essentially I want to recreate what's happening here. And we do have a little bit of ground modulation. We've got some really nice big trees. The main thing that I've noticed about this one is the lighting. So there's a lot of it looks like a kind of morning misty foggy, and I'm almost looking directly into the sun here. Using this image as our base, there's a couple of things that I noticed right away. One is the background is not the way that I want it. Another is the ground is not brick in the Farnsworth house. So I want to really quickly kind of create my scene or set my stage to be a little bit more accurate to that. So I always forget about this, but the background isn't set in this context path. It's actually set in the settings, so we can go to location, and then I'm going to drag this over near Chicago, which is where our building is located. Wow, I almost nailed Chicago there. Somewhere about right in here. I'm just going to go for close enough. I'm not too worried about it. I could zoom really far in, and this map will continue updating and giving me a whole bunch of kind of new or nice information, so I know where I'm going. So I can do that, and then there is a search function, so you don't have to constantly zoom around if you don't like to. But for the background, I'm not in the city. This is just a generic city background. If I click on this, on that background tool, and then I can change my picture. And for this, I think I'm going to go with the countryside, because this is a little bit more like what Farnsworth House is set in, except for that town. And then from there, I can also change my rotation, so I can rotate this around. So if I was kind of standing and I wanted a certain part of this information in a certain scene, I could grab that. Okay. So then from there, I want to change this ground. So what I'm going to do to be just adding vegetation, and if I make this grass, it's going to be kind of close enough. For a typical project, you will probably have your Revit topography that you'll be relying on to give you a groundscape, and in which case you could just delete this out. And we can see over here the starting ground is what I'm looking at, so you could just click on that and quickly delete it out of your project. Also to note, after we imported everything, we can see all of the scene materials, and we can see how those have been collapsed by material. So that makes it pretty nice. And here we can see somewhere in my project I do have a default material, which is not ideal, but it should be fine. I can also minimize this with these little arrows on the side, and then turn the visibility on and off, which can sometimes be really useful to be able to see kind of what is happening behind or around or underneath something if you want to be able to see that. So the next thing I'm going to do is come into my materials, and I want to change this ground material. So I click on, full screen this. I did that by going to my library, materials. If I scroll down, I can see there's a bunch of different categories of materials, which is really nice. And I want to use a ground material, and I want to use a natural material. So I can grab one of these grasses, is probably going to be good. And no, maybe this one. This one will be fine. You can drag that on. This doesn't, at first you're probably like, this is not a very good grass texture, and this is not anything impressive. Essentially what I'm doing, I'm using this as a base for what I'm about to do next. Is I'm going to paint some grass and actually add grass to the project. So if I come back over to my library, I can say vegetation and landscape, and I want grasses and flowers. So I can see I have a whole bunch of kind of 3D grasses now that I can choose between. You can even add weeds in there. But rather than kind of placing these out one by one, if I come back into my context pad, there's a tool called vegetation paint, which is really useful. Also vegetation scatter is really useful too, but I'm going to start with paint for now. And then I can drop in any of these vegetation and landscape assets into the scene to begin to paint with. So if, let's say our project has maybe some little bit taller wild grass, I'm going to put a little bit of clover in here. Maybe it has some of these like tall wispy, some maybe taller grass. It's maybe not so nice as well. And then I'm going to add in some daisies for fun. So now that I've added all of these in here, one of the things I can do next is if I click on them, I can see the density of each of these, and I can also change a few more of the settings of each one of these assets, which will let me, one, change the size, to change the tint or the color, which is really useful for kind of color balancing a scene. And then the other one is wind. And I want wind to be active because let's say I'm shooting a video. If I was just doing still renderings, I'd probably turn this off and it will help my computer performance just a little bit. But I don't have to worry too much about that. Another thing about the navigation, this toolbar up here, we can see when we're clicking on stuff on this kind of left-hand side, we also get kind of the depth that we're diving through these. So if I click back on vegetation paint, it'll take me back. Sometimes I was looking for a back arrow when I first started using Twinmotion, and it can be hard to find. So I'm going to come in and adjust the density because each one of these by default is set to 30, which gives us 120, which isn't quite right. So I'm going to take the tall grass. I just want a little bit of tall grass. I don't want very many clovers, I don't think. And my daisies I'm going to turn down too, just because there's only a couple of daisies. So after I've kind of done my kind of base settings for this, I have a couple of tools up here. I have an eraser and a brush. And so if I click on the brush, I can see I've got this little green orb, which might be hard to see with the kind of grass background. But I can also change the diameter of this paintbrush as well. So if I wanted to paint something more detailed or take some kind of wider strokes, I can do that. And because I just want to be able to fill quite a bit of this, I'm going to use a pretty big brush at first. And to do that, you just left click and hold down. And get a little bit over here. And in here. And it's really hard to see this right now because I'm so far away. Twinmotion is going to be optimizing our brush and our visibility. And I'll show you how to change those settings so that there's not as far of a fall off as what we're getting. And then I'm going to change this diameter, bring this down really small so I can kind of get up close. And I can already tell that these aren't the assets that I exactly want. I think this grass is a little bit too big. And I could do a couple of things like change the scale of that grass. But I actually don't want to do that. And I can do another fun thing here. So now I can turn off the actual Farnsworth house, and this is what I should have done in the beginning, and just paint it out, this whole area. And then I can turn that house back on and see where that's at. And we can already see like I'm getting grass through my my paving here. I don't want that. So I'm actually going to, if I click on this asset, there's a couple of sneaky buttons up here. I can just say delete and it'll knock out that asset. And then I can come back. Oops. I'm going to go back to my vegetation and landscape, grasses and flowers, and I'm going to use probably long grass to bring that in. And then I'm also going to turn the density down of these daisies. There's so many daisies, I don't need that many daisies. Maybe just to 1. There's just a few daisies. That looks kind of nice to me. So now if we come down, I've got a pretty good looking scene here. I do know that this kind of flies a little bit higher above the ground. So if I come back into my starting ground, I can just kind of lower that just a tad so that it is looking the way that I want it to. And maybe that's it. There's just a little bit of float on that kind of porch. And it looks like I accidentally painted a little bit of my house. So if I select my painted vegetation and my scene assets over here, it'll bring all of this back up for me. I can use my eraser. I can turn my diameter way down, and I can just erase that out. So the next thing that I don't like about this scene, just when I'm looking at it, is that I can see how far this falls off, and this is done for performance reasons. So what I can come in and do is I can go to Edit, and I'll come down to Preferences, and if I go to Quality, it'll show a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm set at Ultra Quality right now, which should let me, oh, my view distance is set to high. Okay, so I guess that's fine. I should be able to go to custom here, kind of edit all of those out. But this is an easy way to kind of change what the quality that you're seeing is. There's another trick we're going to do where when we actually create the rendering, we'll set up like a camera or an image, and that'll let us kind of stretch things out a little bit further too. Also let us change the appearance of this if we want it. We can change the sound of the footsteps, for example, could be set to maybe not carpet. Do like stone or gravel, ground for now, which I think will be fine. Before I keep going here, so the next thing I want to do, I'm getting this kind of nice and looking a little bit like how a little bit like the scene of the image that I saw. I think I might paint a little bit more grass out here so that I can be a little further away if I need. Okay. The next thing I can do, and come back into context, I'm going to make a new vegetation in paint, and actually I have to click out of that at first, and then I come over here, go to context, vegetation paint. Because I had the vegetation, painted vegetation 1 selected over here, it's going to continue to modify this vegetation paint asset. And what I want to do is I actually want to make a new one with a couple of different trees. And I'm actually going to come back to, I might come back to that if I can move this stuff around. There we go. I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to just look at these trees again as a reference of kind of what I'm hoping to create. So I want some really big deciduous trees. And that doesn't look like it. There's probably a red oak, maybe a chestnut in there. Oh, I can also go into the Quixel assets and double check in there. Oops, sorry. If I come back to library, I can go to Quixel, I can go to 3D plants, and this will give me a whole bunch of different, where's the trees? Okay, perhaps not. I thought they had trees in theirs. Food, nature, tree, there it is. And no, these are all additional stuff to kind of, these are more of like ground assets or not actual vegetation assets. So they are vegetation, but in terms of like a tree branch, I don't want to just litter the ground with these kinds of objects yet. I guess it kind of depends on where I'm working. So come back in here, come back into trees. I'll be able to get a couple of these that will look convincing enough. So I'm going to drop that one in. I bet that there's maybe the turkey oak. And then maybe an American plane. I thought they used to have a linden plane. I liked that. A London plane. There we go. That's the one I want. I'm going to delete this out. And I'm going to up the density of this one a bit and lower the density of this one a bit. And then I'm going to fly out because if I remember from my inspiration here is that I wasn't very close. And I'm going to up this a bit so I can get a few of it in there. And I'm just going to kind of paint out some of these around how I kind of think this scene should work. And I think there was some over here too. And then there's probably some behind me along the river here. And then I know that the driveway comes in on this upper side, but I'm just going to paint it all in. And then if I come down in here, I should be looking at something a little bit closer to what I wanted. But I want to be able to change the growth of each one of these a little bit. So if I come into my settings on the tree, I can actually change the age of these trees a little bit, which is kind of fun. So I'm going to make a couple of these bigger. Growth is set to on. Seasons auto. Wind is on. That's all good. And I might have a few too many trees actually, so I can very quickly come back to that vegetation paint and start turning down some of the density on each of these. And I think I want to make this one quite a bit older as well. Maybe not. Maybe I want it to be some kind of shrubs. Doesn't look like I have any shrubs in there, which is another thing that I probably want to add a few of. I'm going to come back to my inspiration image and look at that. Okay. It looks like all of those trees are pretty low to the ground. So I can bring these back up. And I'm going to come back here and also, again, just kind of lower the density so there's not as many trees. And I think that'll kind of work. I might brush a couple more over here. Great. And then I do actually want to add in some underbrush because it does look like those trees appear to be growing against the ground, but I bet that there's some pretty big bushes in there that are also kind of doing some filling. So I can add these in, and I'll turn the density of this one down a bit. I can turn this one up a bit. I want this to be a little bit bigger. And I want this one to be a little bit bigger. And now this is looking like a little bit more of like the swampy, hot, humid area around Chicago. Okay. So now back to the kind of inspiration image. One thing I've noticed is all of the colors and the textures of Farnsworth House are not. I mean, obviously the Revit textures need some love. So we're going to come in and do some editing to that really quick. How am I on time? 2:30. Okay, good. So I come back into library. I'm going to click on materials. The first one I like to do is glass, like right away. The Revit glass, this is kind of the biggest bump in a better image I've seen for material is that one. And so I'm going to apply this glass material on here, and right now we'll notice this also looks quite a bit cartoony or cartoonish, and we'll go through and I'll show you how we fix that. The next thing that I want to do is paint, and I think there's a metal paint. There might not be. Grids, marble tile, metal, matte chrome, no. And this is a little bit of a trick here. I could go into the Quixel materials and grab one of those as well, which is maybe what I'll do. Quixel. No, I might be wrong. Painted metal. And then I can grab maybe like a scratched metal sheet, or I don't think that's what I want because I think it's painted gunmetal. No. Scratch scratch painted steel. That's probably a little bit closer to what the actual material is going to be. Oh, so one of the things with the Quixel is you actually have to click download, and you wait a little bit, and it'll grab that asset online, because it would take terabytes of storage to hold every material. So then I'll grab that, and I'll put it on my surface here. And then I'm actually going to come through and edit this scratched painted steel to look more of like the color that we wanted. So I do want it to be white, and if I click on the 3 dots next to that color, it'll let me change that. There's also a little button down here that says more, and this will allow you to change a bunch of the different settings, including the sound. So if you have footsteps of people walking around, might seem a little bit silly right now, but if you're doing like an immersive VR experience, like having those footstep sounds switch as you switch materials can help to being a little bit more immersive. So I'm going to click on this texture, and I'm actually not going to do this. So what I could do is I could come into Photoshop, and if I click open, well, I might as well just do that, and then I'll say open, no, assets. Here's that default steel. I could download this or open it in Photoshop and edit it to look the way that I want, but I'm actually just going to grab a different surface here, and maybe I'm just going to go, again, it's white paint, so it's not going to be that much different than maybe like a plaster, painted plaster. Maybe something like this would work. It looks a little bit more rough than what I want, but it'll, again, for all intents and purposes, it'll be fine. A painted stucco versus a painted steel isn't going to make or break the scene here. So I'm just going to add the whites to where the whites are. Another kind of fun part too, as you go through and explore these, you can start to adjust quite a bit of the different settings within them. And then there's even another kind of setting even further, and I think if we come really close in here, we can start to see that's a pretty good asset. And we can also like kind of lower the bump and kind of change some things there. Two-sided is kind of useful if you're just working with single planes. Sometimes what'll happen is only based on the normal of that plane or of a mesh, only one side will get the material and the other side will turn into this like abysmal black void, like doesn't make any sense. And so that's kind of the basics of materials using the Quixel assets, which is nice. We can come up here and we'll just kind of keep texturing. I at least want to texture the floor because I want some stone. So I'll come back into my library. For this one, I think I can get a good one just from the default Quixel materials that kind of come shipped. So marble and granite. Is there a Tavernine? The Tavernine was a very important part of the design of this house, and a lot of Mises' work. So it does not look like it. So I'm going to actually come into the Quixel Mega Scans and see if I can't find one in stone, floor, and maybe get lucky. If not, I'm just going to use a marble for just the purposes of kind of getting through this. Well, I'm just going to use one of the defaults from here. Sorry everyone. Thank you for bearing with me while I'm being indecisive. So there is like a noisy marble in here maybe that looks kind of like Tavernine. I think this is the one I'm going to use, or this one. And I can see, first thing that I noticed was that the scale of this is way off. So like the tiles in the Farnsworth house are actually quite a bit larger. So I can drag this scale bar here and make it larger, but at the detriment of it looking not as good, perhaps. And then I also start to pick up a couple of other things. But again, for all our intents and purposes, this is going to be just fine. Now we can start to see we're getting some reflections. We're getting some pretty interesting pieces. The only other thing that I'm going to change is actually add some wood onto this. So I'm going to come back to materials. I'm going to go to wood. There should be just a wood panel in here that doesn't have, it's not like a flooring, and this oak might be a good one. Try that. And one thing that I do want to make sure is that in the Farnsworth house the grain actually runs vertically. So if I click on more, I can actually change the rotation of that, which is pretty nice. And then if I come back, I can also up the scale of this one a bit, just so that I can see a little bit more of that kind of wood grain. And then I do want to adjust the color to be a little bit more blonde, I think. Just a little lighter wood. I'm going to say okay, and then I'm actually going to drag that material onto my cabinets and the beautiful armoire. Great. That's looking pretty good to me. I guess I do need to change. Oh, and okay, so here's a perfect example of an issue where all of these materials were set to default, including a piece, part of the ribs in the ceiling. So now they're all grouped into the same object, which is not ideal. So I think I'm just going to leave those alone for now. I think this one was its own. Yes, so that's its own. That's steel chrome plated. So I can come back into the library, come into metal, go to chrome. We can drop chrome on that. We can see we have a nice kind of chrome material on our chair now, and that's a pretty good looking Bertoya chair. So the next thing I'm going to do now, just to kind of keep moving along, I want to add a couple of objects, get some kind of content, some entourage in here. So if I come to characters, I'm going to go to animals. I'm going to add some birds. The C squad, maybe the death squad. And these, it's because I think it's known as a murder. And that's really far away. So I actually want to bring you closer to me. And down. Oh my gosh. Okay, that went really far away for some reason. So I'm going to just hit the number 6 so I can fly really far out. I'm going to wrangle this into place. And there's my little birds. I'm going to add in some of the C squad too. And I'm going to take these and move them. Ooh, hey, there we go. Orbit. I'm going to move these up. I'm going to grab the death squad and move those up as well. And this is, ooh, I'm going to hit 3 to move a little bit slower. It's too slow. Go to 5. And now, they're still really far away, but we'll be able to see them more once we have the kind of sun and stuff set up. Another thing that I might grab is maybe a person. And let's get someone a little more casual. Amir's looking pretty casual, but he's got a tie on. We'll get Chris. Chris will be over here. Chris decided to change the color of his hair and shave his beard and so on. So we can put this guy over here, which is a kind of nice 3D person. You'll see too if you wanted to do like really close up, it's not too bad. We can see this guy definitely has some chest hair and like a 5 o'clock shadow. I wouldn't zoom super close in. I'm not doing like portraits of people, you know. But again, for our scene, they'll work. And I'm going to put him inside. And I'm going to put you, yeah, you're just staring at the wall, bud. That's fine. Cool. So that, again, got there from library, characters, a whole bunch of stuff there. We could click on the Sketchfab library. We can see there's also a ton of stuff in here, including people. And we'll kind of let this load up. Yeah, Spirit Blossom would be perfect for our scene, right? Again, built on a video game engine, so there's going to be some kind of funny stuff in here. But this is all also user-created stuff, so if you see anything offensive, like some random person made that, it's not there to be crude. It's there because someone's making a bizarre video game or something, I think. So the next thing we want to do is definitely adjust our lighting. So we have most of our scene set up here, the way that I would like to see it, almost. I might kind of move a little bit over. One thing that bothers me is the flat ground, but I'm not going to go into kind of editing the ground at all. That's really not something I think we're too worried about in terms of creating landscape. It is possible in Twinmotion if you did want to kind of brush out just a make-believe landscape. That's doable, and if you're interested in that, shoot me a line after class and we can kind of go over that. There's a bunch of stuff like vehicles as well. So if we wanted to put some bikes or cars in here, the Farnsworth house, the driveway is really far away, so you have to walk quite a bit to get here. So we don't have to worry about putting any of that in there. We could put a hot air balloon in the background. Maybe that would be romantic. Or we could put like a giant Learjet. They just dropped in there. All stuff that's pretty easy to add in. In terms of our lighting, though, right now what we're looking at is like the default Twinmotion viewer, and this is pretty consistent with the way Twinmotion has been for a while in the past. But what we want to do is actually make this look a little bit nicer. The newest tool that they've added, and this is the reason why I like Twinmotion, I think, best, is that now there's a way to turn this tool called Path Tracer on, which is also under Render. And if you turn Path Tracer on, it will actually start rendering out the scene. So this is a static render. We see this little wheel here that's showing us kind of how long that scene is going to take to render. And if we use a drop down right now, I have it set to high. Maybe I'll change it to medium just so it goes a little bit faster for us for the sake of this class. And then anywhere we look, we can see we get quite a bit more depth. We get a nicer amount of shadows. Everything's kind of looking a lot better. We also get really nice reflections. So this is ray trace. So these reflections are what's behind me, which is why I also painted some trees in the background so that we could get some of that. And we've got some really nice highlights and stuff. And this is all things that we should be familiar with using kind of a nicer render. If I switch this back to off, we can see we kind of go back into cartoon mode. And the vegetation, I think, for me, is one of the biggest tells, and the glass. Turning this on and off, get a much nicer kind of scene here. There's a whole bunch of settings for this render, is like the number of samples that you want. So this is going to increase some of the quality. The max bounces is going to kind of fill your scene a little bit different. So if you had a scene where maybe there's no lights in the entire thing, you're like rendering a cave down a hole, and there's no lights in there, it's only naturally lit. This will let the light kind of bounce its way all the way into the kind of darker spots of a scene. Some of this other stuff is in, I really haven't played too much with all of this. Like emissive is just going to allow you to kind of change your materials. Your aliasing is what's cleaning up your edges at the end of the render. And then your denoiser is pretty much turning this kind of these little speckles here, which is what's known as noise. It's turning that, it kind of cleans up your scene a little bit by turning that on or off. Sometimes it's nice to see that grain, sometimes it's not. So the other thing that now that I have a little bit nicer kind of shade and shadow quality of what I'm doing, I don't like this sky dome right now is the default Twinmotion one. They have also added in a new way of dealing with that the background. So right now it's a dynamic sky. So as I change the time of day and the sun setting, it'll change the quality of that light. And I can show that to you right now. If we go into, I think it's location, it'll let me change this time of day. And so I could, kind of animate this around and get it to be something more of where, and I'm going to offset north here because in our picture, we're going to do like a 180 on the north, so that north is pointing at me. And then if I change the time of day, it's a little too far. I want it to be about right here. And my shadows were coming towards me, I think. Just going to double check where we're at. Yeah, that's looking a little bit closer to our inspiration. So the other setting I was going to show is under lighting. Instead of using this dynamic environment, what I can do is choose a skylight HDRI, which is really nice, or I could use a backdrop. But I'm going to use the skylight. It's going to spool up a new panel for me to find a skylight. And with the HDRI, what it's doing is it's globally affecting all of the lighting and all of the colors in the entire scene. So it helps really well if you have like a bright, clear, sunny day to be able to go through and have kind of all of your colors adjust. One thing that I have noticed about using the HDRI settings though is that you definitely kind of have to bump your exposure up a little bit for it to start to look accurate. But already I can tell that I like this sky, I like this scene a little bit more. But I do want to be able to change that. So if I clicked on, if I came back in here, I went into lighting, and under this, there's this little more button. If I click on it, it will let me swap these out. I can also up the intensity of that HDRI a little bit, which helps as well to kind of make the lights light and the darks dark. But I think if I come back into my library, HDRI environments is a setting. And so I want to go to skies, and I'm going to go morning and afternoon. And I think our day was a little bit cloudy, but not super cloudy. Let me just double check here. Back to inspiration. So we do have some clouds kind of coming in, and it's giving us some nice kind of halo effects around the edges of those, all the silver linings and that. So I might try this one. This one's looking kind of close. So just drag and drop that. Oh, sorry. Nope. I have to click the little download button. Again, it would take ages to download all of this data all at once. So to kind of help everyone's machine and their asset files, it's better that they keep the hundreds of thousands of assets they have accumulatively all in one. So I can take that and then drag and drop it in. And it's going to take a little while it pulls all that stuff on. Oh, there it goes. So I'm just going to leave you over here. Great. And then I got to find where the sun was at. I think I have to rotate this again. So I can take my rotation, bring it around a bit more. I'm going to turn the intensity up quite a bit. And I think I should have gotten a sunny day because I'm noticing that I'm going to leave this at like a 4. And then I can come back into my lighting. I'm going to up my exposure just a little bit. And the reason why I said I should have used a sunny day is that in our example, that's direct sunlight. And I'm out of time. So we'll pick up on this a little bit after a little bit more on the next class. We'll do some more tweaking. I want to show you how to add like some fog, be able to change weather and all of that. It should be pretty straightforward, but should be fun.